as we hear one person's story of her Asian American Pacific Islander experience. And the title, 100% American and Perpetual Foreigner. And that's our very own Shirley Kinoshita. And what we're going to do tonight is have Shirley tell her story. I'll be sort of interviewing her. We've spent some time online before this meeting, so I get to ask her some questions about her life. And keep in mind this theme of 100% American and perpetual foreigner, because it's an experience that at least is not my experience, and we're here to hear one person's experience. So let me introduce Shirley. Hello, Shirley. Nice to see you again.
Thank you, Paula. Paula was such a big help for me today in getting this program up and running. So I have a PowerPoint. Is it okay to put it up?
Yes, and let's start with your history. So put up your PowerPoint.
Hold on here. I have to find it. Okay, here we go. So thank you so much for inviting me to speak about the Asian American experience. 100% American. I was born in the United States, but I was born in Hawaii. So at the time it was a territory. As far as being a perpetual foreigner, I heard someone speak today on the news, and he was upset about someone who was attacking another elderly Asian woman. And he said he was so upset because this fellow apparently kept using hate words and saying that they're not American. He said, I am 100% American. So the problem continues today that a lot of Asians feel that they're not fully accepted as 100% American. So I'm going to tell the story about my experience and see if you have found, I hope that you learned something about what is happening in our country. Yesterday, Vice President Kamala Harris spoke about the AAPI experience, Asian American Pacific Islander. And actually she spoke a lot about voting rights. And some people were upset because she said, what are we supposed to be talking about AAPI hate incidents? But one thing she did mention was that there have been over 6,000 incidents since a year ago of Asian American incidents where people have been attacked or verbally abused. In many cases, the word incident is the appropriate term because it's not always a crime to call somebody bad words. So let me proceed with this PowerPoint. Oops. Right now I have a problem. Oh, hold on. I have a problem. Do you see the word participants on your screen? Because it's like blocking mine. Can you see a picture of me at 1 year old?
Yes.
Okay, so I have to figure out a way to get participants. Okay, here we go.
No, we can't. Now we see. There we go.
Okay.
Now we see it.
So this is me. I was born in 1942 in Honolulu, Hawaii, to immigrant parents who were from China. So my mother was 40 when I was born. She was a teenage bride, but she stayed in China to take care of her elderly in-laws. And as a result, my parents were separated for quite a number of years. But I did have 3 brothers in addition to being part of the immigrant family. Let's see, here we go. This is my dad. This is the youngest that I could find him when he was, my dad was born in 1900, so it's easy to tell what age he is. with the date. So I think this photo is from 1950, and Apa was by um, spoke really pretty good English and really good Chinese. So he was our main source of learning both languages. My mother, let's see if I can get her up. This is a picture of her when she was a young woman. My mother never learned to speak English. She came to this country when she was in her mid 30s. So by that time, it was really difficult for her. Plus, in China, girls are not educated. She only had 2 years of education. She did learn to read and write Chinese, but only at an elementary level. And back in when she was born, a lot of women of her class or status had bound feet, which virtually makes you a cripple for the rest of your life. She did not have bound feet, but she experienced the being Chinese and being a woman, not having any privileges. So when she came to Hawaii, she came as a paper daughter. I don't know if you know what a paper daughter is. It's in the United States at the time, in the mid 30s, we're talking about the laws that were in effect were the first one is called the Page Act in 1875. There was a federal law that forbid women, Chinese women, from coming to this country. It was because our nation did not want to encourage the marriage of Chinese and population increase that Chinese would bring. So they claimed that the reason they forbid women, Chinese women from coming was because they were prostitutes and immoral people. Well, I think my mother is about as far away as you can get from an immoral person. She stayed back in China to take care of her elderly in-laws. So she came as a paper daughter, which means that she was had papers that made her a legitimate daughter of a resident of Hawaii, but that paper identity was sold, and she acquired it so that she could come to this country. Otherwise, at that time, no Chinese were allowed to bring their families. It was against the law. The Chinese Exclusion Law of 1882 forbid Chinese laborers from bringing any families. They could not own land. They could not vote or ever become citizens. This law did not change until the 1940s when we were at war, and all of a sudden China was an ally of the United States. So things got a little dicey when you say, well, we're not going to let your immigrant people become part of our country. So that's how it was in the early 20th century.
So Shirley, your your parents,
yes,
were married in China and then kept separate for what, almost 20 years.
mm-hmm.
And then what happened?
Well, my mother found it very difficult in China at the time. The country was economically devastated by a lot of some of it was weather, flooding, and there was also wars happening. The communist Chinese were taking over many of the villages, and they were killing all the landlords. Well, my mother got money from my father in Hawaii since he was working there. So she was a landlord, and she thought she would be beheaded because that was what was happening to all the landlords. And in addition, the Japanese were also invading China. So it was a very war like situation. So she got the paper daughter identity and came to this country in the mid 1930s. So this is a marriage certificate that's they became also legally married in Hawaii in 1938. So here's the this name Lan Hing Chang is like a mashup of my father's name, who is Chang Hing Lum, Lum. So our family name is Lum. I'm going to use that term Lum several times. It's also Lin and Lam. They're all the same Chinese character. My mother's name, Kwai Fong Wong, is listed here, and that's her paper name. You'll see that name appear again. I'm going to talk about her name several times.
All right. So so there they are, and the certificate with a pastor on signing the thing. So, but it wasn't now many of us know your husband. So give us a brief story of his experience, because it's, you're a partner.
Yes, I've been married for over 55 years. So remember my mother's name, Kwai Fong Wong. I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to show you the other half. My husband might say the better half, but that's debatable. So my husband is Japanese Canadian. His family, like I think that about 10,000 Japanese Canadians who were living in the country, became enemy aliens because of World War II. So they were also shipped off in about 1945, 1942, to the camps that were set up for the Canadian Japanese. So my husband's whole family, his father Seiichi, his mother Fumie, and his brothers and sisters, and this is Kim my husband Kim Kinoshita, standing up. The rest of the kids are older and they're seated. So Kim was 1, and the picture of me earlier is also at age 1. So they were all my husband was born in 1942, August. He went immediately from the hospital into the camps and spent the rest of his babyhood and toddlerhood in the camps until 1946. So let me talk a little more about my father-in-law. My father-in-law was born in Japan. He did marry my mother-in-law, who was born in Canada. He came to this country and decided that the best opportunity was to join the military, the Canadian militia, World War I. He was awarded a special honor award because he was in a battle in France. He helped save his battalion. So he was considered a war hero in World War I. And there's a monument to the Canadian Japanese war veterans in Stanley Park in Vancouver, and his name is engraved on it. So here he is, World War I, a military hero. World War II, he is an enemy alien. And since he had military experience, I think one of the stories is that the Canadians decided he should guard his people. So that's the story of my in-laws. So I'm not going to go too much deeper into that, except that my father-in-law lost the family farm, which he had bought because he had veterans benefits. Well, they took away his benefits and because he was an enemy alien, and he lost his farm, and his family had no home. They had to spend the rest of their the 40s until 46 in the camps. It was really devastating for the family, as I would think many others who've lost their homes. I'm going to go now into my own family history because our time is limited. I think we'll have a Q&A session later. I just wanted to talk a little bit. I'm going to show you 2 buildings and talk a little bit about the AAPI incidents that I have experienced. The word tong in Chinese means gathering or a place where a hall where I have a friend, Judy Purrington. Some of you know her. She's very active in the Sons of Norway because that's like a fraternal cultural order. And every year they have a WILPF, I think it's called, where they eat Norwegian things, foods. So the tong serves the same purpose. It's like a fraternal. So it's the Lam Sai Ho Tong. So I spent a lot of my social time at Lam Sai Ho Tong because my parents were fairly active in it and their friends were there. They're the Lam family. So this is what it looks like. And it's actually serves a dual purpose. It's also a temple for worship. And if you go in there, they're burning paper money and incense, and there's statues. This Lam Sai Tong is quite interesting. There are photos of the interior, which a lot of people use it as a worship center. I noticed the last time I went there were a lot of Vietnamese who go there to worship. So it's continued to serve a purpose way beyond being a fraternal cultural center. So I looked up the word tong. This word tong is still used and described in American history as places of criminal behavior.
Yeah.
Tongs were considered places where criminals met and plotted against, and to burglarize and rob people. So it was considered a fearful place. Well, let me tell you, my experience in the Tong was we would go to Ala Moana Park with a big big watermelon and have food and enjoy a lunch at the beach, and we would have special plates of food. It was mostly food that we would celebrate different holidays. So I don't know where the concept of criminals is, but here I am. I'm a member of the Tong, and if you remember, I showed the certificate before. My parents gave each of the children a lifetime membership to the Tong, $5 each. I don't know how many of you belong to Tongs, but if you belong to any cultural order, I bet it wasn't $5 for a lifetime.
All right. So Shirley, you have some interesting experiences before we get to this house in Illinois and the incident there. I just want to ask you a couple of things. Your earliest memory you shared with me today. So will you share that, your earliest memory and what was happening?
Well, my earliest memory was living downtown in Honolulu in a rather seedy part of town because my parents weren't that wealthy, and my dad learned a trade. He learned to be a tailor. So he had a little tailor shop downtown near the bars where the military congregated and the arcade and some other less savory businesses. And so that's my experience. Is we lived behind the shop and above the shop, and there was a big kind of gravelly parking lot in the back of the stores that line the street. So my earliest memory is playing there. And the picture of me at 1 year old is the location of that home that I lived in. I mentioned that my earliest memory is the having a little kitten who wandered into the parking lot and it died. And I had not experienced death before. They had a little ceremony and they buried the cat. So my grandson just 2 weeks ago, they lost my daughter fosters kittens, and they lost a kitten, and he was devastated. So that experience reminded me of my experience. I was about 2.
All right. Also, would you share with us your experience of working at a cannery, which is partly what you did, and why did you do that?
Well, when I was eligible to work at about 16, 17, I decided I'd better get a job because my parents told us, the four children, you are going to college. Well, they didn't provide any money to go to college. So we had to earn our own money. So I ended up working at a bakery for $1 an hour. And then I heard that the cannery was hiring at $1.25 an hour, which was big money back then. So I ended up working at the cannery, which I hated. It was 6 days a week, 9 hours a day, and most of it spent standing. And my job was to pack those, those round pineapple slices with the hole in the middle. I had to sort, grade them, and put them in the cans, and then it went down the assembly line and got covered and went off to be sold somewhere in the world. So I did this for 3 years. I decided that's not what I want to do for the rest of my life. It is hard work. It's noisy. It's my sister-in-law worked there too before she married my brother, and she was allergic to the juices that kind of completely splattered all over her. She was a mess. I mean, she was
So,
terrible place to work.
so it's a unique experience to be Chinese and in Hawaii. That's not everybody has that experience. Other people, but tell us a little bit about the Hawaiian environment and why, in the war, the Japanese were not incarcerated. What was that about?
That is very true. The Japanese numbered, I think, about a quarter or a third of the population in Hawaii at the time. They came over as laborers, like a lot of other immigrants, and the ones that we witness today in the California Central Valley. And they just were seeking a better life. But they outnumbered almost every other ethnic group. And because of that, it just was not practical for Hawaii to put these about a quarter of their population in camps, prisons. So they never were. And there was not a single incident of espionage or spying among those Japanese. They arrested many of the leaders, well, what they call leaders. They were mostly Buddhist priests and Japanese language teachers that were arrested, but they were not arrested for any kind of espionage throughout the war. So it tells you something about people's attitudes. It's just sheer numbers that it happened that the Japanese in Hawaii were not put into the camps. There were a few. I saw a video about that, and it was not a big number, and it was not well known. But I did not grow up among white people, and my children did though. They have experienced some incidents. My son in this house in Downers Grove, Illinois, my son was in elementary school, about maybe 5th, 6th grade. His teacher told him after he submitted his history report on Canada that no way in the world could he have produced a report like that. She didn't ask if we had any family members who are Canadian. She just assumed he was not capable of writing anything like he did. It was far too detailed. And, you put up with it over time. So I think my son has experienced more types of prejudice than I have. And the other incident in Downers Grove, Illinois, was when we first moved there, our whole garage was covered with cracked eggs all over. And of course, they didn't leave any calling cards, so we never found out. But I have a suspicion about who did it, and happened to end up somebody who was my son's age and became one of his best friends. So life is strange that way. The egging incident was not something that we could control. We never reported it. I would say that a lot of people in Downers Grove were actually quite civil, and some of them were really kind. I actually ended up being baptized in Illinois. A very strange thing that I became Christian in the very place that has never voted a single Democrat into office in 175 years. So,
So, and you lived in Connecticut and then Illinois, and then you came to California.
right.
And in that experience, you know, the egging of the house in Illinois what about in California? What kind of an experience did you have as an Asian American Pacific
Well,
Islander?
back up a little. I have to say right now that a lot of these incidents that I'm speaking of are fairly isolated. They're not continuous, or, that it didn't happen that often. I used to think it was my husband being called, go back to your country type thing in the parking lots of shopping centers. But then I realized, wait a minute, I was there too. I must have been the same kind of foreign person that was, told to go back to her country. So I used to say it was my So we a number of times we've been called names like that, in the case of my son, another incident was
Let me just ask, is there somebody who's unmuted?
I'm muting them. It's Sharat and the people who came in.
Okay, thank you. Okay, go ahead, Shirley.
So the incidents where people called us names, we never really said very much or were upset. We learned to just accept that fact that people who don't know us thought we were from another country and we should go back there. Some people are not, I think the problem with hate and verbal abuse like that is some people cannot accept it.
So Shirley, you talked about bias and assumptions. So the assumption that your son couldn't write that article, the assumption that Kim should go back to his country. What about the time that they assumed Kim couldn't speak English?
Oh, well, my husband has a PhD in chemical engineering. His specialty is batteries. He graduated with a PhD from UC Berkeley in 1969. Before that, like I did, he applied to several schools in the United States. His professor recommended him. Kim is an interesting person. He worked on a farm. His parents had to be, you call them tenant farmers. They worked the land for other people because they couldn't own any land. They didn't have any money. So they had 5 children. Kim was working the fields. He missed 1 month of school every month in the fall because he had to harvest crops with his family. So he said when he was 16, the family moved to the city of Edmonton, Alberta, and he was first introduced to chemistry, which became his field. He had never even heard of chemistry, let alone study it. He ended up, by the time he graduated, in honors chemistry. And then when he went to the University of Alberta, he was in honors.
What about the language thing? How did that come up?
Well, he applied to the University of Illinois because a lot of his friends had also applied there. I think about 4 of them from the University of Alberta. And he got a letter from the University of Alberta, which didn't apparently look at where he was educated or born. And they said, we can't accept you. You don't speak English. Well, his name is Kinoshita, so I can see why they would not believe this Canadian could speak English.
So that's
no Japanese.
That's a little lesson in making assumptions.
It's not the first time for Kim when he applied to become an American citizen in the early 70s when we were living in, I think, Illinois. he had to be interviewed by the immigration officer, and the immigration officer took one look at him and says, "Do you speak English?" It's so Canadian.
So that's a little, that's one of the lessons, is to watch our assumptions and the biases that come out. And we're going to go into some of the lessons and some of the things you recommend from this, because I want to ask you how your past has influenced your path to peace activism and your connection with WILPF and all of that. How did this past, your history?
Yeah, that's interesting that you put it that way. Let's see. Oh, before we leave my family, I wanted you to look at the graveside plaque that my parents had put on their gravesite. To the left is my father. When this plaque was made, he was still alive. My mother, on the right, her name is Yukwai Chun. Now, I think her name used to be, and the only name we knew her as, was Kwai Fong Chan or Kwai Fong Wong. So I looked at her name on her gravesite. That's the first time I've ever seen that name, and I didn't even know it was my mother, and she was buried there because I was at the ceremony. So I said, it took me a while to figure out what was going on. This name is apparently her real name, her birth name, which she never in her lifetime ever shared with her children. My father knew, but she was afraid because she limited English, limited understanding of this country. She was afraid she would be jailed because she had a fake name. But when she died, it didn't matter anymore. She put her real name on the gravesite. That's how it is when you're an immigrant, and
That's how it is, yes. An immigrant from a group that had been excluded,
Oh,
big time.
well, like a lot of immigrants, the Chinese came over because of gold. Gold was discovered in the 1850s. But their treatment was not like other people.
Yeah.
The Chinese, there's several really good books on the subject of the Chinese being driven out of many towns in California.
Yeah.
In San Jose, 4 Chinatowns have been burnt down. San Jose.
All right.
And many of them were driven out into the Sacramento Delta, where they, after the gold rush and after building the railroads, they ended up in the Sacramento Delta building a lot of the levees for something like $1 a day or less.
All
So
right.
some of them ended up farmers. They could not own land. They had to lease the land in the Sacramento Delta. Chinese in this country have a very long history of discrimination. And, I don't dwell on it. I'm sharing this with you because I was a history major. History fascinates me.
So Shirley, tell us about how that history, both the history of the group of people of which you are one individual, how that impacted your path to peace activism, your identity and the movement to peace activism.
I have always felt that justice, like Martin Luther King says, justice, the arc of justice is long, but it bends toward justice, just truth and just. So I really feel that over time, the Chinese experience should be shared because it's still happening today with over, I think, 6,600 incidents of violent acts against Asians. Most of these are frail, elderly women, Chinese, it's happening to. It's sort of started when the Republican president, Donald Trump, started accusing the Chinese of the COVID, blaming them on COVID, and also our country hasn't had a very good relationship with China because it's become a competitor. It used to be a very poor country. Everybody was on bicycles apparently, and air was polluted, and there were poor people all wearing Mao jackets and hats. Well, that's changed. I was in China 2 years ago. There's more electric cars on the road. The freeways are nice and new, especially from the Olympics in 2016. They are doing very well, and they are a threat to certain people who see them not as allies, but as competitors. So, the flack that comes from all this is that Chinese Americans often are accused of things way beyond our ability to do, like take over this country. I have no intention. I don't want to take over this country.
So Shirley, we have about 5 minutes left before the Q&A. So I just want to ask you to touch on a couple of things. And those you said to me early on, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but one of the lessons that you talked about is everything you say has impact. Be kind and sensitive.
Well, I think the thing about being kind and sensitive is something that you don't really need to be taught. It has to be in your heart. I don't pick on people if I can help it. Maybe my kids when they were little. But, I think if you're kind to people, they will reciprocate in kind. People who hate, often the hate is not targeted. It spills over into many areas, even among their own family. So, I don't assume that anybody is going to hurt me or hate me. I live in a country that I'm proud to be part of. I feel like I'm a loyal American. I've voted ever since I turned 18. I have never missed a vote. So, I kind of try to support, our leaders. Whether other people see me as American, that's going to be their concern, not mine, because I know who I am. And I think my Christian faith helps me not to place blame and not to hate, because that's not the way we were taught. And we report to die.
So I want to get to what we can do, because it's one of the things. And on May 20th, Biden signed into law a bill to combat hate crimes against Asian Americans sparked by COVID-19 after Trump did his thing. And as you pointed out, the crimes against AAPI spiked to more than 6,000 in the year March 2020 to March 2021. And Biden said hate has no place in America. He tweeted that.
That's right. But when President Biden signed that into law, it had already been preceded by a joint action of both the Senate and the House in passing this particular Anti-Hate Crime Act. And it is specifically meant to address the issue of what's happened to Asian Americans. So, it's kind of a complicated issue, but Kamala Harris, I mentioned her before, she said during a talk that was supposed to address the AAPI issue that we should turn that pain into action. And some of the suggestions I mentioned here, they're very brief. Just be aware of what's happening to the AAPI community. They have political clout. I think Asian Americans only make up about 14.5% of the population in our area, but they have a lot of history with this country, and they have a lot of assets. So they will not be quiet anymore. That's what a lot of them said. They will not be quiet about what's happening to the most vulnerable members of their population. And I think some of the things that are being done can be extended to all racial groups. We can help all of. We're not meant to be a country of only one race. This country is becoming very diverse. So among the things that I've mentioned here in the, oops, hold on, let me get that, is to be aware of what's happening to the AAPI community. A lot of this happened since COVID became a huge issue in this country as well as around the world. Reach out to people. Say hello first if you can to somebody who's your neighbor who you really never talked to before. So I've been trying to do that, and people are hungry for social contact, really. And what's happened in the AAPI community has made them realize they're not alone. They need to be part of a bigger community that is helping each other. So some of the action groups that have been around actually a lot longer than these incidents have been promoting different kinds of methods of addressing this issue. Advancing Justice is a very active political coalition. It works to address some of the wrongs that have happened to the Asian American Pacific Islander community. The Stop AAPI Hate.org organization is the major organization, a nonprofit, both of them, that tries to monitor what's happening with the incidents and trying to find ways to correct some of what's happening. An example of this is the bystander intervention training, which has become really popular. And I think it applies to any victim this training is addressing mainly those who witnessed an incident. There's something called the 5 Ds to distract. In other words, if you see a victim being attacked, you try to distract the assailant. If you can't do that, you can talk to somebody nearby who might be in a position of authority, like a guard, a security guard, or somebody who can deal with this situation. If you can't do that, you can also document. A lot of people are using their cell phones to record incidents. You can delay the action by trying to you can distract that person and so that it doesn't continue. Some of the incidents that have been recorded have shown victims repeatedly brutalized and the bystanders do nothing. And that's really horrible. It's horrible whatever race is being involved. And the last is to direct your actions so that it makes a difference. So I hope that I've covered everything. I kind of didn't, this part is not too strong because I have not really witnessed an incident myself. It's just that over time, I have been part of hate incidents, and I shared some of it with you. It's all kinds of incidents. It's not just one kind.
So Shirley, what I like about these is that they are kind of preventive. We can go out before an act happens. We can reach out and say hello first. We can join action groups, and we can attend meetings like this to become aware of the whole issue and really get to know people like we have because you've told your story. And that's more of a story than I would ever hear. We don't make time to hear people's stories. And so I really appreciate you telling your story and just reminding us. I want to put your words back out there again. Everything you say has impact. So be kind, be sensitive, and stand by the victim. So I really thank you a whole lot for sharing your story. And there's, oh, you want to tell us about this slide?
Well, I took an art class, and this was part of my art project. I decided to make my father-in-law the topic of this. So here he is in his uniform. Here's the Canadian flag. Here's the fan. And behind here, you can't see very well, are these guards in this watchtower where they were incarcerated. So it's a really political statement. And my mother-in-law, bless her heart, not know what to do with this painting. So I think after I left, they took it off the frame, rolled it up, and put it in the basement. I have not seen it since, and I've been there many years. So it goes to show you, politics is a very sensitive subject. So I wanted to honor the memory of all our ancestors with this talk, and I really appreciate your attending. So